It is an enormous privilege to introduce Professor Richard J. Powell, the John Spencer Bassett Distinguished Professor of Art and Art History at Duke University. I won't recount his innumerable accomplishments and contributions to the history of art, some of which are relayed in his bio printed in your program, except to underline that his scholarship has been foundational to the study of art history, and especially of African American art history. He was the first to bring the art of Barclay L. Hendricks into serious discourses of art history where it belongs. He and his wife, C.T., were also dear friends with Barclay and Susan Hendricks, whom we are grateful to have with us tonight. On a personal note, Professor Powell has been so generous to me as I worked on this exhibition. On a scorching hot August day last summer in Durham, North Carolina, I went to see Rick, who at that point didn't know me from Adam, or Eve for that matter. He welcomed me with an ice-cold bottle of water and shared his wisdom and guidance like I was an old friend. The warmth and sense of belonging that's inherent to Barclay's paintings are also qualities of Rick Powell, who, if I may say, is also as cool as Barclay's painted subjects are. Please join me in welcoming Richard J. Powell.
Thank you. I'm from Durham, North Carolina, and in the South, we always start with thanks. And so I have to thank Ian Wardropper, director of the Frick, for greenlighting this project, and Amy Ng and Antoine Sargent, who have curated an extraordinary, powerful, evocative call and response between the great old masters and Barclay L. Hendricks. I also want to thank Adrienne Lay, who has been really wonderful in coordinating and organizing and making my wife and my stay here so wonderful, connected to the Frick. Madison. I had to give shout outs to Jack Shainman and Elizabeth Sand of the Jack Shainman Gallery. They have been constantly supportive and remindful to the world of Barclay's genius. And last but not least, Susan Hendricks, who I love and who is with us in this journey to celebrate and to better understand and appreciate Barclay's genius. Next slide, please. Oh, I'll do it like this. I can do it myself. So, when I was working on a book called Cutting a Figure, Fashioning Black Portraiture, I went to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and being the researcher I am, I dug deep, and I went into a whole set of old slides from various students, and I found this slide of Barclay, and it just blew me away. And it spoke to, not just his sense of fashion, but his sense of self as a part of a world of spectatorship and beauty and style. The picture next to it is 10 years later, taken 10 years later, in Central Park. I was on a fellowship at that point at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the Rockefeller. It was a Rockefeller Foundation Fellowship in Museum Education. And I decided to take a photograph in Central Park. One of my colleagues, Lee Ransall, took the picture. I thought that this would be an appropriate beginning for our conversation today, looking at Barclay and understanding that my connections to him are not just art historical, they are kindred. In terms of what it means to be a black man in the late 20th century, trying to eke out one's existence politically, culturally, and aesthetically. I do have something written about this, and I'm going to read it. And what you're going to have today is a combination of reading and reflection. But I wrote this some time ago. Consider Bashir's fashion statement, which is part Superfly, part reminiscent of the male Hasidic uniform, entirely self-concocted and assiduously assembled by Bashir, nay Robert Gowans, and Hendricks in concert, as knowledgeable as one might be of that superfluous, outrageous 1970s look. Hendrix's artistic enshrinement of it functions almost like Roland Barthes' punctum. Details such as the black fedora and two-tone platform shoes and powers of expansion. One of the very few artists on the heels of the civil rights era brave enough to push black corporeality into the darker realm of psychoanalysis. Hendrix invites a reappraisal of how questions of identity in late 20th century art interface with, if not inadvertently undermining, the so-called politics of representation. The other thing about this painting is the background. You'll have a chance to see it upstairs. The color is strange. It's whitish, minty, yellowy, and it's a color that's hard to kind of place in the spectrum. And yet Barclay, being this consummate painter that he was, had enough foresight to say, I need something like this to set up Bashir, something that's going to make him pop. And we're going to talk in a few minutes about the multiplicity of pops that we see in these multiple figures that Barclay creates. But keep in mind that part of his fashion sensibility is also color and the power of color. So we're talking about a moment. And in that moment, one of the things that really stands out is artifice. I'm talking about plastic. I'm talking about fake fur. I'm thinking about polyester. I'm thinking about platforms that take someone one size and shoot them into the stratosphere, as seen with David Bowie's incredible shoes on the left. I'm also thinking about, in particular, African Americans coming out of the moment of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream, and Ebony's celebrations, Ebony Magazine's celebrations of putting your best foot forward. So what does Ebony say when they see Pam Grier and Robert Dokey in Coffee, where part of the narrative is to go underground, to kind of transform oneself through fashion to be something that you aren't in order to accomplish and achieve a goal. So this is the 70s. Hair that is kind of extraordinary and beyond anyone's kind of imagination, or no hair that speaks to another kind of radical approach to the body. And if you are an aficionado of B movies, I can recommend one to you. It's called JD's Revenge. And it's a film from this era, and the premise of it is almost like Jekyll and Hyde meets, the Black Power movement, because this character played by Glenn Turman goes into an antique store, an old clothing store, and finds a hat, and he buys that hat. And over the course of the film, whenever he puts that hat on, he moves from being this nice, gentlemanly fellow to this horrible brute of a person. And I want to say to myself that the filmmaker, Marx, is really kind of probing the idea of fashion as something that can be transformative, that can kind of turn you into something that you aren't. And I just thought that I would juxtapose that poster and pay homage to Horace Ove, the incredible Trinidadian filmmaker and photographer who just died a couple of weeks ago. They did an obit in the New York Times. And this is a photograph he took in 1970, an incredible photograph called Walking Proud London. Just to underscore to you that this explosion, this new kind of black thing that's happening in the late 60s, early 1970s, it's not just New York, it's not just Chicago, it's throughout the black diaspora. This painting, it has a story. Sir Charles, alias Willie Harris. And it's also connected to film and filmmaking. So there's this film called Raisin in the Sun. and it's a classic based on the play by Lorraine Hansberry. And there's a moment in this film where all of the money that this family has scrimped and saved for, the elder son in the family has decided he's going to invest it in a liquor store. But he has to go. This is in Chicago, so he has to go downstate to Springfield to get get all the papers to get it approved. And he knows this guy named Willie Harris, who seems to know all the ins and outs of getting your permissions and things in order. So he gives that money over to Willie Harris. And we all know in dramatic situations, the money is gone. and so Barclay, in his brilliance, takes that same narrative and transplants it to New Haven, Connecticut in the late 1960s, early 1970s, when New Haven students are eagerly trying to get their contraband, their stuff that's not really legal to get. And they have this fellow in New Haven, this incredible young man named Charles, or Sir Charles. And like Willie Harris, he disappears with the dough. Without the dope. Barclay paints this guy, a real person from the streets of New Haven, and does him a la Charles I in three positions, that famous, wonderful Grandmaster painting by Van Dyck. But here we have the full body. We get this incredible red coat because he's royal, he's a sir. These shoes, these two-tone shoes, which we've seen already in Bashir's portrait. And then we get these three angles. And all you have to do is go to Turner Classic Movies and watch Shaft, and you'll see this same position, this incredible coat that flares and flies as you move down 125th Street. So Barclay's able to kind of incorporate these looks, these styles, these evocations of kind of a new identity, and to incorporate them and make them fine art. I just simply showed you on the side, alongside that painting, Sir Charles alias Willie Harris advertisements from Ebony during that same time period. One could, if you didn't have access to the stores, you could get a kind of a Superfly hat, an incredible coat, even a walking stick, or you could get a wig that says or a wig that says, not literally says, but when you see it, it says Afro-American, or it says curly girl, or it says new fall or long fall. In other words, these appropriations, these ways of attaching sartorial things to the body to create a new identity was very much part and parcel of the moment. There was a book published in 1970, which I really use now as almost like a major text when I think about the last quarter of the 20th century and black art and aesthetics. And it was called, or it is called, In Our Terribleness. And the author is Amiri Baraka, very, very famous playwright, a poet. And he did this book and the book is very unusual. It's poetry, it's prose, and it also has these incredible photographs. And I'm going to show you a photograph at the end of my talk from In Our Terribleness. But when he uses that word terrible, and when he talks about terribleness, you have to kind of go past your Merriam-Webster. You have to go past your Oxford English Dictionary. You have to go deep into the word, take the word apart, deconstruct the word, analyze what Baraka is saying about being terrible. He's saying being extraordinary. He's saying being outrageous. He's saying being radical. He's saying being revolutionary in that word terrible. These terrible, beautiful beings on the streets of Chicago and Detroit and St. Louis and Harlem. And again, the research and scholarship on Barclay keeps on coming, keeps on going. When we did that incredible show years and years ago at the Nasher, it showed up at the Studio Museum in Harlem, there was this incredible painting called Vendetta. And the art historian in me wanted to connect it to all sorts of ideas and theories of somebody kind of having a vendetta against somebody else. And it was just about a year ago that I learned that the painting is named after Vendetta Mathiah, who was an incredible dancer who Barclay met at Connecticut College during the American Dance Festival events that would take place there every summer. And I'll talk in a few more minutes about these dancers who come to New London, who he paints and really connects with and captures the kind of power that they contain within their bodies. But then, as you can see with this work, and you'll see with other works upstairs, he also plays with contrast. There's a great statement done in the early 20th century about Jack Johnson and also about Bert Williams, these early black entertainers and performers and athletes. And the comment is, contrast is vital. And when they're talking about they're talking about performing, and they're talking about movement. But I think that this is an aesthetic sensibility that, again, Barclay picks up on, in this same time period, where he gives us these incredible, rich, dark complexions, and he places them, against these stark white backgrounds. And then to add to the magic and to the irony and to the provocation, T-shirts that say all sorts of wild and surreal and incongruous things that cause us to ponder, that cause us to think about the body and how people dress and the messages and the communiques that are transmitted via fashion. And this is a moment where clothing does make the man or the woman. And I'm thinking in particular growing up in Chicago and in the 60s and seeing people connected to the Nation of Islam. And clearly Gordon Parks was thinking about that when he does this remarkable photograph of Ethel Sharif that was published in Life magazine in 1963. I'm also thinking about Robert Sinstack, a really, really talented photographer, with this amazing portrait of the FOI, the fruit of Islam. So this fashion language, this fashion coding is not just necessarily transgressive. Sometimes it has to do with a kind of a reimagined, sense of one's moral, position on the planet. I actually had a phone conversation with Marsha Hunt a couple of months ago. She is close to a colleague of mine at Duke in Romance Studies, and they're in communication with one another. And I think my friend said, well, you have a fan in Durham, North Carolina, because he saw that picture of you in Vogue in January 1969, where you are showing the au naturel look, and it's been in his head ever since. And when we think about 1969 and we look at Barclay's responses to this natural look from Miss T from 1969 or Lordy Mama from 1969, we see that this is more than a fashion statement. This is aesthetics, in the flesh, and it's also political. And I've talked a lot about this Afro look, but in the hands of Barclay L. Hendricks, it becomes more, again, than what it seems. It becomes a silhouette. It becomes a silhouette that speaks to the flora and the fauna, the tree, the fist. It speaks to, again, this life and this assertion of Black identities that really wasn't present until this kind of pivotal moment. Miss T is truly one of the most important paintings produced in this whole time period. And the Philadelphia Museum was so savvy. Anne Darancourt, the director at that time, had the vision before a lot of museums were buying Barclay's works to pick that painting. And luckily, they have this incredible work. Same with Lordy Mama, that's at the Studio Museum in Harlem. So I have to talk about sports, and I have to talk about style and fashion as connected to sports. And I'm calling this little mini segment of my talk Barclay and Clyde. And the painting is really, really remarkable too. And growing up in Philadelphia and working for the athletic league with kids out of the community, Barkley is part of that world, and he's picking up on the energies that one experiences in athletics, and particularly in basketball. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm 70 years old. And so when I was growing up, the game for black men was baseball. I have fond memories of my father listening to the White Sox, on the radio in the 1960s. Something changes though by the time we get to the end of the 1960s. Basketball really becomes the game, and the street creds are created as connected to one's prowess on the court. And when I use the term or the category Barkley and Clyde, those of you in the know that I'm really using the nickname or the alter ego of Walt Frazier, who played for the Knicks. And Walt claims in his papers and his writings that his alter ego was Clyde. And for him, Clyde is who we see here in front of this car in this long coat, the same coat that we saw on Bashir. A big hat, the same hat that we saw more or less in that ebony advertisement. And then holding this basketball. But I want to go back to two, because what we're also experiencing with two, I would argue, is the African American equivalent to Leonardo's Vitruvian Man. We are looking at a grid, we are looking at geometry, and we're thinking about geometry in relation to an aesthetic. And this aesthetic is the beauty of the game. The possibility of the backboard, the possibility of making two or more. And also the chance element, this beautiful ball floating and flying, in space. So Barkley doesn't even have to do bodies to kind of invoke this aesthetic in a serious way. A street game on the right. And an incredible photograph done around 1980 by Barkley, showing this hanging, the glide, the space. This is choreography. This is fashion as well as sports. And I just had to do this. Anthony Van Dyke. Who do we have here? Lord John Stewart and brother Lord Bernard Stewart, circa 1638. I mean, these guys knew that they looked like something. But I wanted to juxtapose them with Little Bits. And Little Bits is a kid out of Philadelphia that Barkley, one of those kids who was a part of his charge with the athletic department. But look what Barkley has done. He's taken, the form. The form that is normally used, the tondo, is used to represent the Madonna and Child. And he puts a little black kid in that tondo. But then it's not enough. So you get the kid, and then you get the hat. And the hat has this energy, this blue and this orange kind of colliding with one another. And that's not enough. Then you get a pom-pom, and then the pom-pom echoes the tondo of the outer rim of the painting. So there's all this conversation going on. I mean, Barkley being a product of Philadelphia and the grand traditions of painting and art that one sees at the Philadelphia Museum, and I'm going all the way back to Thomas Eakins, he knew his art history. And to be able to translate that and to attach it to the people of that moment in that place is powerful. I've got to read this quote from Prince. Paint a perfect picture. Bring to life a vision in one's mind. The beautiful ones always smash the picture. Always, every time. So, Barkley, he's all over the place. I mean, in this moment, it's just like a decade plus, and he's pushing on all these boundaries, breaking out what people in the traditional art world saying, no, you can't do that. Doing things in African American culture where there's no, you can't do that. He does it all. And he starts this whole body of work that's dealing with gay and queer people and really celebrating them for their style, for their beauty, for their power, for their statements, their aesthetic statements. This is another one of those paintings. The National Gallery of Art got it as a gift in the early 1970s. I mean, they didn't buy it, but now they know they really have something that's rather extraordinary. George Jules Taylor. I knew Jules, when I was at the Met in the late 70s. He was at the Brooklyn Museum. He was at Yale. He was working on a degree in Egyptology. He was 6 foot plus, skinny as a rail, a character, flaming and brilliantly beautiful and smart. And Barclay picked up on that. And therefore, he does a whole set of paintings of Jules Taylor, and we're going to see a couple of them. But this one I particularly like, and I like showing it in this room and in this museum. Marcel Breuer, these gray walls. Look what Barclay did. He floated Jules Taylor against this gray field. He's floating barefoot in a cape. This is pre-Andre Leon Talley, y'all, about capes. Denim and a knit hat. And defiant and powerful and beautiful. And I was talking about Vendetta Mathea. There were a whole group of black dancers who were coming through Connecticut College. And again, I did my research a couple of years ago, and I was able to go into the archives. And now we know the name of Ralph Farrington and Alvin McDuffie, who were connected with the Walter Nix Dance Company, a very important dance company in New York during that time period, who would go to New London for American Dance Festival. And in 1974, Barclay paints them. And he calls the painting Sick of You. Sick of You. Sick of You. Now, again, like terrible, you gotta go beyond the dictionary, and you gotta go beyond your Merriam-Webster and your Oxford. What do you mean by sick of you? Well, clearly what he means is a world of extraordinariness, a world of impossibility, movements that are beyond anything you can imagine. So much so that when you see it, you have to say, sick of you. I'm just sick of you because you have done something that I cannot imagine. You have done something that I can't even conceive. You have done something that's really, really extraordinary and powerful and brilliant and aesthetically pleasing. And so Barclay paints Ralph and Alvin, and I wanted to put the photograph just to show you how there's this interesting thing that happens between the photograph and the painting. And people just assume that, oh, well, you have a photograph, your paint, you're not adding anything. No, we got paint, we got color, and we also have with Barclay this interesting thing of acrylic and oil, and glaze and matte. And so we have this interesting conversation going on, and then he'll throw in the metallic paint just to kind of play with you. And so we have these multiple layers. I'm showing alongside Alvin and Ralph another painting of Jules Taylor, New Orleans Nigger. Jules was from New Orleans, Louisiana. And this term of endearment among African Americans is invoked in the title. But look how he creates this image of Jules. We see his lengthy body. It's actually a kind of a counterpart to Miss T, with the hat and this bright yellow, shirt, and then this short jacket. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And since we're kind of in the world of fashion, there is a really important designer doing his thing during this time period, and that would be Stephen Burrows, who's also a kind of a New Jersey, Philadelphia person who comes to New York in the late 1960s, who has I think he has a contract with Henri Bendel and does really, really interesting radical clothes. We're looking here at Pat Cleveland, who I just saw about a year or so ago, who still looks as fabulous as she looks here. She was one of his favorite models, wearing a dress that has what you call a lettuce hem, where the hem just kind of is like lettuce that you've just taken out of the plastic bag. And then we see Stephen himself sitting in a chair with this kind of little boy's navy cap on and pants that have a high waist, and then silver shoes. So this is a moment of excess and artifice that's taken to a place that I would argue has an interesting conversation once it hits these bodies, which are very real, which are very fleshy and muscular or shapely. And so there's this wonderful call and response, hence that great album cover of Valerie Simpson that she's also wearing some Stephen Burrows outfits. So I was thinking when I was looking at this painting, Woodrow Wilson is breakdancing in his grave, wherever that is, to have been named after this Jamaican young man who finds himself in New London in front of Barclay L. Hendricks and is painted so extraordinarily. My new project has to do with color. I'm writing a book called Color Struck, Painting Pigment Affect. And I won't be using this painting, but I'll be thinking a lot about it, how Barclay has chosen. I think this is a decision on his part to place Woody in this hot, luminous environment. And yellow is one of these really, really strange colors. Yellow is not something you can hold on to. Yellow is energy. Yellow is heat. Yellow is light. Yellow is something ethereal. So making this incredible dancer do this incredible step, poised and balanced on one foot, surrounded, enveloped, ensconced in energy and light is such poetry. And I'm heading towards the end of my talk now. And I chose this title, the sly, the slick, and the wicked, because I wanted to also underscore this transgressive kind of dimension of portraiture that Barclay is so invested in, as well as these really, really beautiful pictures. And perhaps that's no better stated than in this one, Brown Sugar Vine. Brown Sugar Vine was actually shown, I believe, in this building in a major exhibit that Robert Doty organized in 1970-71 called Black Art in America. And you have to give Robert Doty credit for finding something that really wasn't necessarily what a lot of people wanted to see in 1971. But I think he also understood that there was a power in this and something very different at work in a picture like this. I will be including this image in my new book because I'm doing a whole chapter on brown. And brown is a color that I've just gone crazy doing research on brown because many people feel like it is an elemental color. It's not in the color wheel. Goethe and Newton had a whole set of colors and brown ain't in there. But once you start to do research, you begin to realize that brown was one of these fundamental colors that's been with us, since the medieval period, referring to the earth, referring to the soil, and as we move into the Enlightenment, referring to people who aren't white. And Barclay picks up on the power of this brown and applies it to himself in this kind of provocative, playful, satirical, ironic, beautiful way with Brown Sugar Vine. Susan knows that the holy grail for art historians are works that we can't get to, that works that we are hoping to see and engage with and find one day. And that's not the case with Tough Tony. That piece is in the ether, in the art world. But there's this painting that's probably somewhere here in New York called Arriving Soon. And it is unreal. Again, it's that same strange, yellowish, pale background, but who he has is Angie, this friend of his from New London, poised in her go-go boots, her white go-go boots. It's 1969, 1970, folks. Her afro, and then these balloons kind of floating in space. It's kind of one of the few moments Barclay breaks away and does something that's almost kind of semi-narrational, but it's a narrative that's kind of open-ended. We're not quite sure who's coming or what's coming. And then, of course, we have the paradigmatic Coca-Cola machine kind of on the other side. That's kind of the counterpart to this living, breathing woman who is so contemplative, so introspective into herself. When we see this piece finally emerging, we're all going to be blown away and realize that this is another masterpiece from this time period. So before we began, I was playing, or I asked Amy, and she kindly accommodated me to play this song by Ashford and Simpson called Take All the Time You Need. And it's a song that was written in 1974. It was on an album from that period called I Want to Be Selfish. And you saw Valerie Simpson in those wonderful clothes by Stephen Burrows. And Barclay does a painting called Take All the Time You Need. And it's important to think about this painting in relationship to something that I've actually been talking about, but I haven't quite articulated. And I will call it the Afro-Baroque. The Afro-Baroque. And as we know with the Baroque, we're in a moment of excess, of curlicues and shells and patterns and motifs that seem to kind of tumble and fall on top of one another. When we go to those great churches in Rome or in Germany, we see them. But I think that Barclay is exploring an Afro-Baroque, in the U.S. in the last quarter of the 20th century. And this painting in particular. And he told me that he and Adrienne, his girlfriend at the time, she was dancing. And she would play that song, that damn song, he said, over and over and over and over and over again. But I wanted you to see the lyrics of it, and you'll have to go back to your memory of what I was playing for you, and then you'll understand what I mean by Afro-Baroque. Because the lyrics are chill. The lyrics are, take all the time you need. The lyrics are, you don't have to worry about anything. And Valerie Simpson and Nicholas Ashford sing it in such a poetic way. But when you hear the music, it's like adagio. It's like almost symphonic, with violins and French horns. And this is what's happening a lot in black music during this time period. Those of you who know your vintage music of the early 1970s, Isaac Hayes, same thing, orchestration, Diana Ross, orchestration on top of soul. And so Valerie Simpson and Nick Ashford write this song, Take All the Time You Need. And one message is take all the time you need, but the meta narrative, the meta message is, we're in a moment of velocity. We're in a moment of freneticness. We're in a moment of speed. We're in a moment of excess. We're in a moment of layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And you see this in this painting. We see the couch, and we see her feather boa. We see those crazy weird socks. And of course, for me, the punctum here are those platform shoes. I had a pair like that. Who knows where they are now? But if they even exist. But Barclay places them there on the right, and their questions, are they hers, are they his? We'll never know for sure, but they provide that touchstone. Again, Roland Barthes talks about that spot in the painting that's going to take you someplace. I don't have much more time. Ideology and style are the same thing. This comes out of that book, In Our Terribleness, by Amiri Baraka. And he gives it to us in such a brilliant way. Barclay does in this painting entitled Bitumen Slave Angie. And hot pants, of course. This was a moment of hot pants, y'all. And T-shirts and big afros. And of course, when we look at Angie, one wonders, this is not a slave. This is not somebody who can be coward. This is not somebody who can be bid in any stretch of the imagination. So again, these wonderful mixed messages. And again, that weird background. This one is pink. So it's the opposite. It's going in a totally different direction. But I want to end today, because I know I probably talked more than I need to talk. I want to end going back to that book, In Our Terribleness, because there's this photograph in it by Billy Fundy Abernathy, and it's called Original Hipster with Herbert in Background, Draped, Chicago, Illinois. I'll repeat that. Original Hipster with Herbert in Background, Draped, Chicago, Illinois. And look what this photographer has done, just an impromptu street scene where these brothers are kind of walking perhaps down Martin Luther King, or then it was called, I believe, South Parkway in Chicago. And look at Herbert. Or rather the original hipster. The head going one way, the body front, the hips akimbo, or however you describe that, the hands in the hip. Talk about embodying style, embodying a sense of oneself as object d'art. But this is living, breathing object d'art. This is object d'art that will lead a revolt once they get, to the point that they can't take it anymore. And I'm juxtaposing it with a painting by Barclay that really hasn't seen the light of day either much. It's called New Michael. And I never had a chance to talk to him about New Michael. What do you mean by New Michael? Is there an old Michael? But I suspect that what Barclay is doing is talking again about the freshness and the vitality of that moment, and that people had the potential and the possibility of reimagining themselves in a way that would really reflect themselves on one hand in a superficial way, but in another hand in a very, very real, invested way. And so we have this profile of this guy with his afro, and then this incredible straw hat kind of pressed upon it, with the shadows not giving us all of his features, but giving us just enough for us to guess, to ponder, to reflect on what lies there as well. Thank you.